Hello and welcome to this episode of Standard Deviation, my column and video series. I'm TCA Sharad Raghavan, Deputy Editor at ThePrint, and I'm going to be speaking to you about my latest column on how, unless the Modi government comes up with a plan before it takes action, its attempts to send China an economic message won't have any impact on them and might even hurt us. It's clear that the Modi government's move last week restricting the import of laptops and other electronics is aimed at China. It couldn't be anything else, since about 60% of those electronic imports come from China. Of course, the official messaging is all about national security and creating verified and trusted supply chains for electronics. But national security is what countries say when they want to get out of international trade agreements. With Minister of State for Electronics and IT, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, using the word trusted thrice and verified twice in the same sentence while justifying the import restrictions, it's absolutely clear that a message is being sent. The government wants to encourage electronics importers to source their supplies from countries other than China. Now, it's strategically important that we keep sending China a message. Diplomacy, international relations, and security priorities demand it. However, it's also important to remember that, at least economically so far, showing China a lal aankh is pretty much as impactful as such a message has been. Almost every recent attempt India has made to hurt China economically has met with about as much success as somebody trying to injure an elephant with a pea shooter. And this will continue unless we line up a plan B before we undo the models we have come to depend on. Relenting and allowing companies a window until the end of October to secure their laptop supplies, when the import restriction was originally supposed to have been effective immediately, is an example of action preceding thought. Another example was when we were forced to greatly relax restrictions on the procurement of solar components from China in May this year. In several cases where India has taken action against Chinese companies, the damage has been felt more by the Indian economy than the Chinese, forcing us to backtrack. This needs to change. Let's start with the laptop import restriction decision. The first thing to remember is that it's not an import ban. Companies looking to import simply need to apply for a license. So in theory, companies can still import from China if they receive this license. It's an illusion of freedom, but it's still distinct from a ban. The other thing to understand is that 2/3 of India's laptops are imported and most come from China. The 1/3 that are domestically manufactured are in fact simply assembled. Most of the parts come from abroad and largely from one country. No prizes for guessing which. On the other hand, India makes up less than 3% of China's laptop exports. Beijing simply does not care what New Delhi does to restrict trade in this space. For one, the more laptops that are assembled in India, the more dependent India will be on China for parts. Our domestic chip manufacturing capabilities fall laughably short of where they need to be. Second, our two other biggest sources of laptops from abroad are South Korea and Taiwan, both of which don't have the manufacturing capacity to keep up with India's growing demand in case our demand suddenly shifts to them. Where do you think they'll source their supplies from to keep up? Again, it's China. In all of this, it's likely the Indian consumer is the one that will suffer on account of lower availability of electronics and higher prices. The other argument being made in favor of the laptop import restrictions is that it will help the domestic industry. This is undoubtedly important, but it's better done through subsidies and other incentives rather than artificially restricting market competition. In other words, the government needs to comprehensively rethink the production-linked incentive scheme that has failed in this sector, rather than implementing import barriers. The PLI scheme has been a success in several other sectors, so why not this one? Unfortunately, this import restriction decision isn't the first time India has tried to send China an economic message. In 2020, the Modi government rightly amended its FDI policy, saying that companies in countries that share a land border with India could only invest here after getting our government's approval. This too was aimed at China, which was caught trying to take advantage of the COVID-19 distress to take over Indian companies. While no doubt strategically important for India to do this move's economic impact on China was negligible. It's not as if China was a big investor in India anyway. According to the government's own data, China accounted for a minuscule 0.43% of all the FDI that came into India in the April 2000 to December 2021 period. India also amended its public procurement policy in 2020 to mandate that only licensed companies in these neighboring countries could bid for government contracts. There was a strategic reason here too. But the importance of China as an economic supplier showed itself in the fact that in May 2023, the government exempted public sector enterprises from this mandate if they were importing solar components. That is, costs of public sector solar projects in India started rising once Chinese imports were restricted, and so the government had to undo these restrictions. Without another sustainable plan, China remains India's biggest source of cheap solar components. There are no two ways about it. Then we come to the multiple Chinese app bans, including of the highly successful TikTok that India implemented. These two were an important national security decision, with several countries around the world following India's lead due to concerns about malware that was installed in these apps. However, the pro-government, very vocal crowd on social media was quick to call it a big blow to China and its companies. This was not quite the case. ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, posted a profit of $25 billion in 2022, an almost 80% jump over the previous year. Yes, the TikTok division itself is still in losses, but as the Financial Times reported, advertisers are increasing their spending on the platform, and so it's only a matter of time before it becomes profitable. Whatever contribution India's app ban has made to TikTok's losses, it's still too small to have even dented the parent company's profitability. Another major blow to China that was touted on social media was the Enforcement Directorate freezing about 5,500 crore worth of funds of Chinese handset maker Xiaomi in 2022. Here too, the ED probably had very good reason. But compare this action to the about 9,000 crore worth of tax evasion by Xiaomi and other Chinese handset makers, of which the government has so far been able to recover just 18%. On the other hand, China's relative economic size and influence is such that it has forced India's long-term ally, Russia, to demand payments from India for its oil payments in the Chinese currency yuan, something the Modi government couldn't have been very happy about. Also, any talk of an emerging BRICS currency that can potentially replace the US dollar is incomplete without also saying that this currency would, in essence, be a China-led currency. India has strategic and security considerations that are paramount, but it would be silly to forget the sheer size difference between China's economy and India's. And so, to hope for an economic impact of Indian action on China might be somewhat far-fetched, unless a lot more thought goes into those actions. So far, this deeper strategy has been missing. On that note, that's all from me. Thank you so much for watching.